So hi, it's Esley and JB again, and during our recent trip to Nashville, we stopped by Bouchercon, which is one of the biggest conferences for mystery writers and readers.
And while we were there, we caught up with three of our favorite writers, Reed Bunzel, Barclay, and Kay Kendall.
So enjoy.
Hi, my name is Reed Bunzel, and I primarily write mysteries and domestic international thrillers. I've written 5 Jack Connor mysteries, one of which just won the Silver Falchion Award for Best Mystery. And I have a new international thriller that's a sequel to Greenwich Mean Time coming out next week, September 10th, and that is The Fall of Vivaldi.
Okay, Reed, what was the worst writing advice you ever got?
Many years ago when I first started out writing and had just sold my first book to a major New York publisher, I was talking to my editor and said, "Do you want a sequel or should I write something else?" And the editor said, "Well, we'd really like you to make that decision yourself." And so I wrote something that was not a sequel, and it didn't sell. It wasn't even bought. And about 30 years later, I ran into the same editor and he said, "Why didn't you ever write a sequel instead of that other thing you gave us?" And I said, "Because you said to write what I wanted to write." And he said, "Well, you should have written a sequel."
Okay, what's the most challenging thing that you've had happen to you as a writer?
I think the most challenging thing really is when I was younger and working a full-time job, finding the time to write, and I always did. It was at night. And now it's so much different because as a full-time writer, I really spend more time during the day and being able to do that. Sometimes, though, a real challenge still is to keep my wife out of my office when I'm really focused on something and she has a question about whether the dog has gone out or is it time for lunch yet. So it's really just a matter of finding the time and making sure you've got the privacy and commitment to putting words down on paper.
Okay, Reed, what is the most surprising thing that ever happened to you or was said to you as a writer?
I think the most surprising thing was just recently winning that mystery award for at Killer Nashville, the Silver Falchion. I really didn't expect to win it, but I think the most surprising thing that was said to me really came when I was 8 years old, and I had a wonderful teacher who was the writer and illustrator of children's books, and one of the things that he had us do that year was put together our own book and illustrate it, and so I did. And afterwards he took me aside and said, "Reed, you really need to be a writer." And my next book, The Fall of Vivaldi, is dedicated to him. His name is Tom Hamill.
And what are you working on now?
I have 2 books that are currently with my agent. She has Catch and Kill, and she also has a new book that she's reading right now called The Protection Agent. In addition to that, I'm currently outlining. I am an outliner, not a pantser. I am outlining a book called Double Helix, which is a book about a common person, common man who is thrust into uncommon situations that have to do with DNA, hence the double helix reference.
And what would be your best advice to a new writer who's trying to break out in this crowded market?
That is really a tough one because there's a lot of writers who are trying to do that, and I hate to sound trite, and I hate to sound like I'm repeating what probably everybody else would say. You can't be a writer without writing, and I've talked to a lot of people who say, "Well, I didn't have time this week to get to it. I'll get to it next week, or I don't have the space to do it properly. I'll have to make that space, or I have to figure out what's for lunch or what's for dinner before I can do anything that has to do with writer." And that is not it. If you're going to write, you have to write, and you really have to put it first. You have to be almost vicious about it in your life and just put the writing first, whether it's a half hour a day, an hour a day, 3 hours a day. Find the time to do it because you're going to wish you did. And if you don't find the time, you'll never be a writer.
And thank you very much, Reed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Dawn Barclay. I write nonfiction as Dawn Barclay, and I write psychological thrillers, romantic and domestic suspense as DM Barr.
So, Dawn, can you tell us what was the worst writing advice that you ever got?
Worst writing advice I ever got was that I was switching from writing psychological thrillers. I wanted to write a sweet romance during COVID because I was really tired of murder. And my publisher at the time, I asked her if I should do it under a different pen name, and she said no, that everybody would be following me to clean, wholesome romance after I'd written some really kinky psychological thrillers. And I found that they did not follow me. So my advice would be to switch pen names when you switch genres.
So what's the most challenging thing that you faced as a writer?
Most challenging thing is exposure. I can write anything. The problem is getting people to read it.
And the most surprising thing that's happened to you as an author, or most surprising thing that was ever said to you as an author?
I would say one of the most surprising things is this conference, because I came to this conference in St. Petersburg maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and no one knew me, and I spent half the time hiding in my room. And this time, not everybody, but a lot of people seem to know me. I know them. I feel really comfortable, and I feel like I'm accepted now as part of the author community, so it's been great.
So what are you working on now?
I have 4 books coming out in the next year. I have an anthology I co-edited coming out in September called New York State of Crime. I have a thriller coming out in January with Level Best Books called Deadly When Disturbed, and I have the first 2 of a 10-volume series of true crime travel guides called Vacations Can Be Murder. First one's coming out in February.
And what would be your best advice to someone who's a new writer?
My best advice is to get a really good editor. And that is because you can take all the theoretical how to write classes that you can find, but when you're working on your own work and you're correcting your own work, that's when you really learn how to be a writer.
Okay, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thank you.
I'm Kay Kendall. I'm the author of 4 historical mysteries. My heroine, Austin Starr, is a child of the 60s, as I am, and I've always wanted to solve mysteries, and that's what my heroine does.
So Kay, tell us, what was the worst writing advice you ever got?
Everybody almost always says, don't write what you know, or do write what you know. And neither one really helped me. I had to kind of find my own way, and it's a composite of the two. I know some things, and I do write about those, but then I go out and research the things that I need to know.
What was the most challenging thing that happened to you as a writer?
The most challenging thing for me is finding the time and blocking out the rest of the world. It's hard for me to, once I sit down and start, it's good. And every once in a while, I lose my focus, and I have learned that what I can do is I take some time off, and I do a little craft project or something. It takes 2 weeks maybe, and then I feel myself being drawn back to the computer, and off I go. I just need a little hiatus, and I have to trust myself. But it's scary the first time that happens.
What was the most exciting or surprising thing that ever happened to you that might have influenced you as a writer?
The most exciting thing that ever happened to me was I won 2 writing awards at Killer Nashville, and the wonderful historical mystery writer Anne Perry gave me my first award, and that was super thrilling. It spurred me to go on and write more, and it's a very fond memory of mine, of course.
Are there any particular writers that influenced you?
Well, I was of the age where Nancy Drew was a big deal, and that was great. I always loved mysteries. But I started reading Jacqueline Winspear back when she got started. And she began writing about the aftermath of World War I, and her heroine was in that. And I saw how a female who didn't have the bang bang shoot 'em up type background was able to solve mysteries, and she really kind of inspired me.
And what would be your best advice to someone who wants to be a writer?
Do it because if you want to be a writer, do it because you love it, or you have to, or you just want to give it a try. Don't do it with the eye of, oh, I'm going to be famous or I'm going to make a lot of money, because I think that's the wrong motivation. You do it because you have to or you love it.
Kay, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you.
Guys.